continue our coverage of the tension in the Middle East. We have Javed Ali here with us. He's a professor of practice at University of Michigan's School of Public Policy and also an expert in terrorism and national security. Thank you for being here.
Terrence, nice to be with you again.
So let's first start with just the fact that this tension continues and that things seem to be escalating. Are you surprised at all that we saw this move?
So I would assess in the of last night's attack in Iran by Israel that we are probably headed more towards a stage of the conflict that is going to de-escalate. Doesn't mean the hostility between both Iran and Israel is going to subside, but the crossing of these thresholds, the Israeli strike against the facility in Damascus on April 1st that killed over a dozen Iranian military officers, then the Iranian response that you have mentioned last Saturday on Israel directly. That had never happened before. And then yesterday's attack by Israel on Iran. So we've seen in the past couple of weeks these sort of red lines being crossed. But I do think we're going to go back to the pre-April 1st world of what I keep calling the war in the shadows, or that arena of the shadow war. It doesn't mean that things aren't going to be high risk, doesn't mean that each side isn't going to try and hit the other really hard, but they've been doing that. Both Israel and Iran have been doing that to each other for decades. So I do think we're going to move more towards that and less towards these steps that bring the region or both countries into full out war.
And Javed, what did you make of Israel's strike, and especially in terms of the scope of it? I mean, it was expected that they would retaliate somehow.
That's a great question, Meredith. And I would have to believe that over the past week, in the aftermath of Iran's attacks in Israel, that a bunch of options were being considered or even operationally being prepared for Prime Minister Netanyahu to then make the final decision as the commander-in-chief in Israel. And we don't yet know all the factors that went into the decision to launch that attack yesterday, but it seems very measured, very proportional in terms of the damage, not the volume, but the damage or lack thereof that Iran's attack inflicted in Israel. And maybe that was part of the design, is to do something that followed up from the rhetoric over the last week from senior Israeli officials, showed a demonstration of a capability, although that is a very minute sort of aspect of Israel's capability. This was not the full extension of it by any means. And then sending the message to Iran that, again, Israel is willing to cross one of these red lines. But because it didn't do a lot of damage, no one apparently was killed. The Iranians haven't, for the most part, responded with rhetoric either, or fiery rhetoric. So I do think these are all signs that are pointing us into this phase of de-escalation.
And you used the word message just now. Is that what this effectively was from Israel?
I would assess that it was. I mean, it was absolutely a message that was being delivered through military means. But the message, it was, in my opinion, that Israel has these very potent capabilities. Apparently, none of them were detected in advance, unlike the 300 weapons that were fired, a combination of cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, drones that Iran fired against Israel, and perhaps fairly close to some of Iran's nuclear facilities. So I think that was part of the messaging too from Israel, is that Israel can hit Iran at a time and place of its choosing. Yesterday obviously was not a full extension of that type of the type of capability that Israel possesses, and Israel has not followed up with any, at least as of today, any rhetoric either. So that's another sign to me that the messaging by both Iran and Israel seem to suggest de-escalation, not escalation.
Sure, and a lot of people are calling for calm and peace. What would that even look like, or what are the steps that need to be taken for that to even be a possibility at this point?
Well, again, this is not going to lead to some kind of normalization between relations between Iran and Israel. They're going to continue to conduct operations against each other, much like they have for the past several decades. But when those things happen, for the most part, they don't get talked about publicly, or they don't rise to the level of these kind of discussions we're having in the media. But they do have real world effects on the ground in places like Syria and Lebanon and Iraq, or against Israeli interests in the region, but they just don't rise to the level of the discussions we've been having the past couple of weeks. And at the same time, and your previous segment before we started talking references, Israel has its hands full right now with the war in Gaza and everything that we know comes with that. There is a threat to Israel from Lebanese Hezbollah on the north, and both Hezbollah and Israel have been, again, trading punches against each other for the past 6 months with real world effects. People have been killed, and tens of thousands of Israelis have not been able to go back to their homes in northern Israel. So I don't think right now that Israel could really afford, both diplomatically and operationally, another all-out conflict with a country like Iran, which would be orders of magnitude harder than the ones they're already confronting with Hezbollah in the north and Hamas in the Gaza Strip.
And speaking what Israel can and can't afford, Congress is considering a $60 billion foreign aid bill to support Israel, Ukraine, and the Indo-Pacific. Is this enough to protect those countries, and is there more that can be done?
Well, on the foreign aid package, just based on late breaking developments, apparently the package may move out of the House, then it'll have to get over to the Senate, and there appear to be these different sort of uh, different political sort of lines that are being drawn with respect to different portions of the aid. So there appears to be more Democrats who are trying to put conditions on the aid to Israel. And on the flip side, there are conservative Republicans who are trying to limit the amount of aid going to Ukraine. I would assess that based on the different sort of pieces that are part of this package, that it's more risky for Ukraine in its fight against Russia to go without this next tranche of U.S. aid, which will take some time for it to get delivered, even if Congress passes the bill and President Biden signs it, versus Israel. I think Israel can, for the most part, sustain its current posture against all these different threats we've talked about for a while, but eventually they're also going to need U.S. aid as well. So I do believe in a short-term time frame, in the case of weeks, that it's more important for Ukraine, and for Israel, it's probably long. They can hold out longer, at least for several months, without a new round of U.S. aid going to it.
All right, Javed Ali, thank you so much for joining us this evening.